before we get rolling, I want to just read a little bit of introduction. And I pulled this from your book, so tell me if I pulled anything wrong. So first of all, Ken Cherry is a fifth-generation Texan. I'm glad you led with that. He is a U.S. Marine Corps veteran, served from 1966 to 1970, graduated from the University of Texas at Arlington, summa cum laude in finance and economics. And I really liked this one. You're a 42-year member of Mensa.
Well, that's 50 years now. So.
Okay, yeah, sure. The book. So the book was book's about 8 years old then.
Yes.
Let's see. Retired owner and principal of a regional Texas investment firm. Former state director of Texas state director for the Mutual UFO Network, MUFON, which I used to be a member of too. I was a field investigator out here in Georgia for a while. And you headed up one of the investigations you headed up was the Stephenville investigation, which of course is something we're going to be talking about. And let's see, founder and president of Epic Extraordinary Phenomena Investigations Council, which we're definitely going to want to hear about. And let's see, just a few of your media appearances. It's a long list, so this is the highlights. Larry King Live, Dateline, Discovery Investigates, and UFO Hunters, which I realized actually was the first place I had ever seen you because I remembered the Stephenville episode, which was in, I think, season 1 of UFO Hunters. And
it was the last episode, and the producer had already been told by the History Channel they weren't going to be renewed, but the Stephenville episode pushed the ratings up so high that they came back at the last minute and said, hey, we're renewing you for a second season. And they came to me and said, Ken, we don't have any cases ready. Can you help me? So I pitched, sold, and consulted on two episodes in the second season.
Okay. All right. Whenever I first reached out to you, the person who put us in contact used that word Stephenville. And yes. I thought, well, I'm going to get, hopefully I can get Ken on the show. And we're going to talk about this really interesting UFO case called Stephenville. And as it turned out, what we're actually going to be talking about is the book that you wrote, which I don't want to say. Should I say it's about Stephenville or should I say it's...
Yes, yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Well, the Stephenville investigation went on for an entire year. At one point, I had 42 investigators in the state. And I think over the period of the year, I had about 18 investigators and a half dozen scientists working on the cases. And during the investigation, there were a number of roadblocks that were thrown in my way and in the team's way. And so I started looking inward at why were these obstacles constantly being thrown at me. And so I did a deep dive into my own organization and some of the people involved with it and so forth. And also with all of that exposure I was getting, at one point I had three network TV stations, trucks in front of my house waiting to do interviews. I mean, it was just crazy, day and night. I started getting calls from whistleblowers, and they would tell me things. And the first one I thought, well, that's interesting. And then the second one that kind of intersected, and I went, well, here's some confirmation. But this kept happening. And it was from scientists and intelligence agents who would say, I can't go public with this, but here's something you need to know. And so what I did was incorporated a lot of the information that I discovered in my own investigation behind the scenes in the book. And I would say probably in every third page or so, there's a reveal that I had to write the book as a novel because I was threatened with lawsuits and harassed even after the book came out for some of the more obvious reveals that I've made in there. So I would say the book and the investigation are closely entwined, yes.
And just so everybody knows, the name of the book is Marc Slade Investigates the Stephenville UFO.
Thank you. Yes, that's correct.
Well, you're very welcome, and it is available on Amazon, and we'll make sure to have a link somewhere. I encourage everybody to go get a copy of this book. It was interesting because, I've read, I'm not by any means an expert in the UFO field, but I am borderline obsessed with it. So I've read more than the average person probably has, and I'm kind of used to, it's a UFO book or it's a book on an investigation, and it's going to be the timeline and what happened and things like that. And the first words in the foreword are, "This is a work of fiction." And so I thought, well, this is going to be interesting. Where is this going to go? And I got to tell you, the book scared the hell out of me. Honest to God, there are parts in the book, and we can get into all that were terrifying. Before we get too deep down that rabbit hole, I'm curious, how did you come to the field of UFO investigations?
Interesting. When I was about 6 years old, we lived on a ranch in what is now a suburb of Dallas. And it was very sparsely populated back in those days. It's called Duncanville now, but back then it was, just scrub trees and farmland and so forth. And kids in those days could go missing for a long period of time. Their parents were, didn't worry about them.
The good old days.
They got home in time for dinner. But at any rate, walking around the ranch with my dog, going through a thicket of trees, we came into a clearing, and I looked up, and there was this strange silvery object going across the horizon. Bear in mind, I'm only about 6 years old. I've lived in rural communities all my life, so I had no idea what it was. But the next thing I knew, there was another object, a craft coming down from a much higher altitude towards this silvery object. And as they came closer together, I don't know if it was a glint of the sun or whatever it was, but it looked like there was a more or less of a lightning bolt between the two objects. But anyway, what I later learned was a jet started billowing fire, smoke, black smoke, and the pilot ejected. Well, the silvery object took off. And later, back in those days, kids were to be seen and not heard. But whenever my parents got together with neighbors, all they talked about was rescuing the pilot from the trees when he had come down and his parachute hung up in the trees. No one else must have seen this, what later was, I found out, was a UFO, of course. In 1953, General Benjamin Chidlaw, he was in charge of the U.S. Air Command from 51 to 55, I believe. But at any rate, he gave an interview in Time magazine and said that we were losing a plane a day someplace in the world for a couple of years, attempting to force UFOs to land, and it never ended well for us. So apparently, as a child, I saw one of these attempts to force down a UFO, which did not work out for our pilot. I believe Truman was the one who put out the order, force them down or shoot them down, which they eventually resented because it ended up in us losing a lot of planes.
That's incredible. So you actually saw a U.S. aircraft interacting with the UFO, and then subsequently that U.S. aircraft started billowing smoke, and we lost it.
Crashed, yes.
Did you later on, when you got involved with MUFON, did you ever try to look into that to see if there was Was Blue Book going on at this time, or was this out of that window?
No, I don't believe Blue Book was around at that time.
Okay, so there's
I don't know if you were aware, but in 1952, about the same time, there was an armada of UFOs that flew over the Capitol.
The Washington merry-go-round.
Yeah, Washington, D.C. It was, I think, July 12th through the 29th, but they came back time and again. On my former program, we interviewed two witnesses to that. One was an elderly man who'd been a CIA young agent who was stationed at the Pentagon at the time. And he told about the UFOs being chased by jets. Back when he was a young man, he gave that interview on a local radio channel there in D.C. And he received as punishment, I was sent to South America for 2 years, and I didn't even speak Spanish. Yeah, there was a lot of UFO activity in those days, and I guess they, whatever their intent was by flying over the Capitol in 52, it created a lot of new programs in the government, clandestine. The CIA put together a panel called the Robertson Panel in 1952 because there was such a stir about the armada of saucers. And they used this famous professor of the day. And, he brought in a lot of other scientists. One of the recommendations, or several of the recommendations they had, were one, that they had to begin informing, meaning putting out their tilt of the story to the public by use of the media, and they even named Walt Disney Company back in those days. Another thing that they recommended was infiltrating UFO groups, to help shape the way the news was presented to the public, to find out if there were really people there who had information that they were spilling and so forth and so on. So the Blue Book was also a later direct result of that, because the original intent of Blue Book was to explain all this away and tell the public there was no reason to panic and so forth. There's swamp gas or whatever. But I think after they infiltrated NICAP, which was the big UFO group of the day in the 70s, Roscoe Hillencutter, who was the first CIA chief, was on the board of NICAP, and another aide to Goldwater, another CIA agent, was in NICAP, but they ruined that by 1980, put them out of business. I think after that, they decided, wait a minute, it would be better to have a functioning UFO group with worldwide information gathering capability. Now, one that, for national security, we will have a special group of investigators for it. And so along comes MUFON, which was founded by a man whose brother was a CIA operative.
MUFON, the founder of MUFON was related to a CIA op.
His brother, yes. Let's say allegedly.
Okay. Yeah. I tell you, that's because whenever I was in MUFON, this was a decade ago, probably. I can pinpoint it because I can tell you when I left was when Hangar 1 came out, the TV show.
Right.
And boy, that just set wrong with a lot of people. You know, a lot of the stuff about that show, a lot of the, it was sort of like, well, wait a minute, you know, this is supposed to be MUFON's TV show, and it just seems to be kind of, you know, well, let's just say not serious, to put it, you know,
Right.
put it that way.
Well, I think one of the purposes of that was to be able to pay their international director a salary.
Mm-hmm. Who, incidentally, I think is going to be sentenced this month.
Oh, okay. I was wondering about that.
Yeah, also at the same, just so the audience knows, the international director at the time was Jan Harzan, who was ex-IBM, I think. Something like that. He had some credentials. And
He does a lot of black budget work for the government.
Yeah. Well, I got the impression that MUFON just sort of turned into a for-profit organization. That was just my impression at the time, when he came around. And it was really disappointing because we had a great state director out here in Georgia, Ralph Howard. He was a really good guy. And there were other people out here in Georgia that were just really, really top-notch people. And you could just sort of see the morale just plummet, and it was like, what's happening? And now MUFON still exists, but is it an active group anymore, or is it just sort of there?
I founded a group in Dallas, DFW MUFON 26 years ago. And when I took over as state director, I think there were only about 13 active members in the entire state.
Wow.
Because Houston, a group had defected to form a group called MUFON. The very popular section director over Boston moved to Illinois to be near her daughter and granddaughter, and that group fell apart. And all that really existed, and the group in Dallas where I took over, they went off to form a group called the Eclectic Viewpoint. At any rate, all that remained was just a few old guys down in Seguin, Walt Anderson, all those people. So, I had a hell of a job rebuilding the organization, and I did it by bringing in speakers on a regular basis. But at any rate, they have recently started back up, and they hold meetings every 2 or 3 months. And I go and, I get respect as the former state director, and I've given a couple of lectures there and so forth. But they're back up and active. They got a good guy running.
Well, that's good. That's good because of, there's definitely a need for something like MUFON. And it would be nice to see, the sort of return to, or not, maybe not return to well, I suppose let's go ahead and turn to your book.
Well, let's finish that thought by saying,
okay.
My feeling is that MUFON's greatest benefit is being able to bring people of like minds together. Because as accepting as the public has become, and jaded, frankly, it's still difficult for a lot of individual contactees and folks who've had, sightings and so forth, to discuss it with their own family and friends. And the socializing with other people who've had like experiences, I think, is very beneficial for a lot of folks. They always, well, I won't say always, but in my day, let's put it this way, the suspicion was, and I don't know if you lost me there for a second or not.
No, you're back now.
Okay. The suspicion was that they didn't place the most sensitive cases on the online, send them out to the state directors for distribution, that they had special teams for that. And Bigelow's team was always rumored to be the one who got them. He had his own scientist, and supposedly has a warehouse in Vegas full of things, artifacts from UFOs and so forth. So that was one of the problems that I ran into with the board, with MUFON, and some of the obstruction that was placed in my way, was that this was a huge case. It blew up and got up before MUFON headquarters could get their hands around it. And they wanted to manage the flow of information to the public. And so they kept throwing obstacles in my way because I was being interviewed several times a day for months. And so, they desperately they had wanted to maintain the case by themselves without, me making everything known that I could find. So that's what caused me to start looking internally at MUFON, and one of the reasons I left later on. But anyway, you can pick up from there.
Well, it's actually interesting what you said. I've never heard before. I think it was NIDS was the Bigalow Outfit. I know that was the one that did the Skinwalker Ranch investigations.
Right.
That's an interesting thought that MUFON might have been piping over some of the high profile big cases over there.
John Schuessler and Robert Bigalow had a relationship going way back before MUFON. So, that's where the connection lies. But, they had served on other organizations together at, relationship level. So that's, there was a tie there for quite a while. So, and of course, I'm sure you're aware of Bigelow's obsession with UFOs.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I think the first time I ever heard anything about all of that was probably when I read George Knapp's book on the Skinwalker Ranch, which that's been out for a while now. Now everybody seems to have a Skinwalker Ranch project, and I think there's about 100 books on Amazon. Probably two people who actually have any firsthand knowledge.
Right.
Was Stephenville, while you were with MUFON, was Stephenville the biggest case?
I still think it's the biggest case they've ever had.
Really?
Yes.
Now, if you wouldn't mind.
Well, let me back that up. As far as the public knows, we don't know what they might have done clandestinely that never showed up on the books.
So having said that, would you mind just giving the audience a little idea of what exactly the Stephenville case was all about? And because that's what the book, that's the core, the heart of the book is the investigation, your protagonist's investigation of the Stephenville case, and then everything that leads, in the narrative that it leads him to, which is the really terrifying stuff.
Well, it is serious. It's a serious matter, and likely there are people who've been disposed of, killed, accidentalized, whatever you want to call it, that died under questionable circumstances, who wanted to go public and, ended up dead. So, I mean, it's a deadly thing. There are factions, 3 factions that I found out in my investigations. Those who want to disclose, and I'm sure you and I would be among those, but then the people who don't want to disclose, and they are powerful people, and the others, which, are the non-human inhabitants of this planet. So, and I understand, I've heard the arguments from all sides, and, there is some merit to it all, but in the end, I think the biggest fear is that it's a existential threat, the truth, if it ever came out to the public. But at any rate, I'll go back and tell you what happened. With January the 8th of 2008, a very respected businessman in the Stephenville area And two of his friends were out in the evening, in early evening, and it was a clear sky. And they're all talking. By the way, Steve is a private pilot. I think at one point he owned 3 planes. And one of his friends, who was a long-term employee of American Airlines, and another friend, were all out talking outside, and they saw these lights going by in the sky, and they were traveling at a high rate of speed. And while they were trying to figure out, he said they thought they were going about 2,000 miles an hour, because Steve said he had flown the distance that these lights traveled. He knew how far it was, and based on how fast it went from point A to point B, it would be going about 2,000 miles an hour. But while they're trying to figure out what in the heck did we just see, the lights come back the opposite direction, this time with F-16s chasing it. And he said at one point the F-16s went into afterburner, and the UFO said, well, I've had enough of this. It just accelerated and left them like they were standing still in the air.
What was it? Just at that point, was it a light in the sky, or was it a shape?
When he said when it came back, they could make out shape that the lights were actually on this craft, and he described it as a 1/4 mile wide and a mile long.
Wow.
Pardon me. Yeah. And so huge, bigger than, a battleship or whatever. So that was given to the little newspaper there in Stephenville. I think it was a 3-day-a-week paper. And they had a part-time work gal there, and who reported desk that day when he walked in to talk about it. And of course, Steve owned a very large trucking company there, and he's very highly respected. And so when the story was printed in the newspaper, I've been the state director in Texas for maybe 10 years, and everybody knew I was the go-to guy for UFO stories. So I had a call from an AP reporter, Angela Brown, and she said, I just heard about this UFO down in Stephenville, and she read me the description. She says, does that sound, believable? And I said, yeah, a lot of UFO reports from a 4-county area. There's 254 counties in Texas, so pretty significant. I'm going to send a team down to, take witness statements and so forth. Well, when she put that story out on the AP words, it went all over the world. And I mean, it just caused incredible interest. My phone started ringing off the hook, and there were reports pouring in. And we knew that we couldn't go out and interview everybody individually. So we got a central place, first in Stephenville, then we moved it to Dublin, which is right down the road. And we were sponsored there by the original Dr. Pepper company, this original plant was in Dublin. Anyway, got to this little town, dusty brick roads and things, and there was no place to park. I drove around. I went into the building, and it was standing room only. But there were news crews from all over the world. There was a Japanese correspondent. There was somebody I have one producer there she worked for NBC. And she said, I was doing a documentary in New York, and my boss called me up and said, get down to Stephenville, cover this. And so, I have pictures. There's booms and mics and stuff all over the place. But anyway, just to try to give you some idea, we had another meeting of witnesses and had an overflow as well. So I stopped interviewing people at 150 myself, and my team took hundreds more.
Well, the first thing that sort of jumps out at me in 2024 that wouldn't have I don't think the thought would have crossed my mind in '08 is when I see the media behaving like that, I kind of wonder who's giving the orders. You know what I mean?
Right.
You know, like, what do you think that was an organic media response, or do you think that there was somebody or some, you know, the word came down, hey, we need to put some light on this? Because I know that's sort of one of the angles in your book is the idea that, you know, maybe we can do something like this and see how the public will react, and that'll let us gauge whether we go to step 2, step 3, and so on, and in our plan.
Well, you put your finger on the whole rationale for the what happened, and so you've touched upon the truth there. But as far as the media, no, I think that was organic, and I think part of the reason was that the credibility of the witnesses was just, unimpeachable. We had, as I said, highly respected. This is a little college town, aside from the fact it was less than 20,000 people. We had no kiddos, no college students, where somebody could say, what were they smoking, wacky weed or something? No, these were all gray-haired folks. And, we had pilots, we had law enforcement officers. One of the elected officials there was a constable, and Leroy Gayton was one of the more vocal witnesses. And we had others like him. I mean, so these are the kind of folks who, some of them could easily be expert witnesses, if they were called to testify in a court case. So I think it was the number of witnesses, and I think it was the credibility of the witnesses, and the fact that I think the AP wire is what lit everybody up. I mean, we were getting calls from Australia, from UK, from every country in Europe, just about, Japan, you name it. And Fort Hood is right near there. And a lot of, it's the largest military base we have in the country. A lot of, in those days, a lot of people were staging to go to Afghanistan or were coming back from there. And I mentioned, some of the military guys have been stationed in Afghanistan since that happened, and they wanted to keep up with it. But anyway, I even got requests from Afghanistan for information.
Really?
So for some reporter. So was it from the military times? No, Taliban times. What do you think?
Yeah, on there, I don't think they don't do podcasts. I don't think.
I don't think so. But at any rate, I've never seen such interest. And so the amount of control that somebody would have had to have over, magazines, newspapers. I was featured in Texas Monthly Magazine, Fort Worth Magazine, NBC, ABC, CBS, So no, it couldn't have been coordinated. But everybody at first just wanted to know what was it. They were curious. They knew they'd seen something that was not, our technology or anything that anybody had seen before.
Were they scared?
No, they were just curious because these are older people who were, this is tough business. They're farmers, a lot of them. A lot of the people had lived there all their life, and then they went away, into the military or had careers. And then they came back home to farm or ranch around there. They just, these are kind of people. The main industry in Stephenville was dairy farming. Most of them have small dairy farms. As a matter of fact, I start out with my first case talking about one of the witnesses we ever made, I interviewed. Anyway, you can't make a living off of 10, 12 cows. So most of them, they go out, they take care of their cows in the morning, they go to their day job, they come home in the evening. take care of their cows and so forth. So these are hardworking people. They're not sitting around watching the sci-fi channel at night,
Okay.
So they all started out very curious, hyped the story locally, and that carried people to a different level. Whereas I brought in Dr. Bruce McAbee, who is probably the premier photographic expert, at least in the country, if not the world. I'm sorry, he's passed. But anyway, Bruce was
optical physicist, used to work with NASA. He's been, as you said, he has passed away, but
he's worked for the intelligence services. I think his CIA handle was Seagull. Anyway, allegedly.
Yeah.
Anyway, we brought him in to analyze some photographs, video that we obtained, which was all quite interesting. But what happened was my most valuable asset was my FOIA expert, Freedom of Information Act expert, to request, and he was also a radar expert. His job was to request the radar data on the given nights that we had reports. Well, we were a couple of weeks into the investigation, and the MUFON board took them away from me and told them to only report directly to them.
Why would they? Why did they give you a reason?
Zero, none. And so, I called and complained because also their spokesman for the director was going on interviews with this little reporter, Angelina Joyner, who was making all sorts of wild claims and trying to discredit my team. And he was sitting there, seemingly supporting these fantastic things that she was saying that were critical. Well, she was gathering reports of sightings and publishing this stuff as if it was proof. She kept saying, well, I'm finding proof everywhere. What's wrong with the MUFON team? Well, as fast as we could disprove her stories or explain them away, I would say, she would make some other claim, and the director's spokesperson would show up on another radio show with her, and so between that and so forth. So anyway, I was contacted by the UFO Hunters, and they asked if they could come assist, and I said, yeah, please do, So with their funds, we hired another radar specialist and Bruce McAbee to consult, and so almost all of the hard data that I would say all of the hard data we collected was due to the funding by the UFO Hunters. If it hadn't been for them, all we would have had is a bunch of witness reports, and my team would have looked foolish after all of those months, and MUFON would have been at their discretion whether they would release anything that they had discovered or not. And, they made it clear when I went to the board, that when they were in session and burst in, Jan Harzan came over and says, Ken, come out in the hall. Let's talk about this.
That's fascinating that the UFO Hunters had that kind of a positive. Yeah, I've always had a soft spot in my heart for that show. I always, who was it? Ted Ackworth, the scientist who was on the show. I'm trying to remember.
He's a dimwit. Yeah, go ahead.
Who was Bill Burns?
Bill Burns, right?
Colorful fellow. It was. I
worked on the set 3 times with Bill. We butted heads the first time we met.
I can see that. Bill always struck me as somebody who, how do I put this delicately? If there was a sort of a weird explanation for something, it didn't seem to take a lot of evidence to convince him that was what had happened. At least based on what was on the show. I never met the guy,
If you saw him work his magic behind the scenes.
Oh, really?
Amazing. Oh gosh, yes.
Yeah, because he sort of fell off the map too after the show. I haven't seen anything, and it's been, I mean, now it's been what, 12, 13 years since the show's been off the air. But I did like it, and I kind of
actually Pat Uskert's brainchild, that show.
Really?
Pat started he did a podcast thing for a weekend deal called UFO Highway or something like that. But he would drive on his motorcycle to go where he would meet with some scientist or witness or something like that, and he would video it. He put it out on YouTube. And Bill Burns' wife, I believe it was, saw this and contacted, I may have the story a little off, but it was Pat Uskert's initial effort. And then she knew somebody went to History Channel and pitched it. So Pat told me that the Burns insisted that they be co-creators with UFO Hunters. But it was actually originally his baby. But anyway.
That's interesting. I always liked Pat. I always thought Pat would be a good guy to sit and have a drink with and talk UFO stuff.
He stayed with me for about a month after the UFO Hunters was over. It was very interesting. But anyway.
Yeah.
Good guy.
Well, so the radar, you said that was a big deal in with the case, because obviously it makes sense. If you have people seeing something and they're coming to you and they're saying, I saw something in the sky, that's, the human eye is one instrument. And if you can have another instrument like radar show you something else and say, look, there's two instruments now that are saying something happened. That's a big deal. What sort of returns did you see on the radar? Or did the expert, conclude that was seen on the radar?
Yeah, the first radar capture that we had of the UFO that Steve Allen and his friend saw was exactly where he said it was at exactly the time he said it was. In that particular capture, bear in mind, none of these UFOs that we studied over the year's time were transponding.
Okay? Right.
And they were doing maneuvers that, conventional craft don't do, But at any rate, it was where he said it, where the witnesses said it was. Now, in that particular capture, it was going 750 miles an hour. The first
that's a radar confirmed velocity of 750 miles an hour.
Exactly. But we were later able to get military and civilian radar that tracked it, and we did find it going at speed of 0, meaning just standing motionless in the air, to over 2,000 miles an hour.
Wow.
And we confirmed, as Steve Allen and his friend said, the thing was somewhere between 2 and 6 football fields long.
I mean, that right there, to me, we like to talk about smoking guns, and people think that the smoking gun is, a ship landing on the White House lawn. But to anyone who knows anything, I mean, even just the most fundamental aspect of aviation, that's a smoking gun.
Right. Well, people and everybody focuses on Steve Allen sighting, but we had dozens of radar capture over the 1-year period. Sometimes, and there were different types of UFOs. There was this mothership, as some of the media was calling it, and others which were like orange or white globes, orbs. Sometimes they would be flying in formation. Sometimes it'd be 1 or 2 or 3, or then it would turn from 3 to 2 to 1. And we captured these things on radar. And at one spate of sightings in October of that year, we correlated the radar data 87% to the witnesses what they
to their recollections, what they had reported to you.
But I want to emphasize that this was not a one-off event.
Well, you just said October, and so we're already. I mean, so what? January to October,
right?
I mean, that's.
But there were sightings in between there as well. So,
yeah, it's a huge range.
Yes.
I mean, I
Like
I can't think of another case. I mean, you think about other UFO waves or flaps. Yeah, I can't think of any that have legs like that.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that the whole story has not been told by more than half dozen production companies that go to Stephenville. They interviewed the same people, Steve Allen, the Constable Gayton, and a couple of other people. A Netflix producer, Amblin production company,
Spielberg.
Pardon?
That's Spielberg's, right?
Yes.
Amblin? Yeah, okay.
Yes, he hired a production company to do an episode on Stephenville for Netflix, and they called me up, and I had a deal, and I was actually already worked with the executive producer for 2 weeks, and we were going to tell the whole story, and then he hired a showrunner, a director for that episode, and I'd already had a deal verbally. I've never been. I got to watch my words here, but I've never been stabbed in the back like this before. But I've always gone with verbals. Mm-hmm. Well, I have got contracts, but they're no better than the people you deal with. But at any rate, so the showrunner comes in and refused to honor my contract, my agreement with the executive producer, which I was supposed to be getting a consulting fee and a appearance fee and so forth, other things, all my expenses paid, blah, blah, blah. But I was going to make all of this information available to him about the additional sightings, the additional witnesses, so forth and so on. This is probably the 6th or 7th, 8th time that, CBS, CNN, Netflix, a Japanese company, a BBC, everybody has done the story, and they all come in and interview the same people. And it's all about the one sighting.
Yeah.
In my view, this is very under reported event.
Well, just based on the number of witnesses, the duration of the event, and the radar data, that right there, you don't have that. The Hudson Valley case didn't have anything like that. None of the big flaps had all three of those all put together like that. It's curious, and I think it's probably you have production companies that somebody gets an assignment to do a UFO series, and they just sort of pick the greatest hits, do a surface level show, like you said, interview the same people. Tell the same story all over again just to get a little, bite at the apple. And I don't think that there's anything out there, a TV show or a series that's being run by somebody who really cares about it. There's stuff on YouTube, but they don't have the budget. They don't have, these are by and large, those are small shops, who don't have the money to, spend a year or two, doing the research and putting it together. And that's a shame.
Well, Netflix is one that did have the budget. Unfortunately, they chose to just pop out something plain vanilla, once again. But at any rate,
played it safe.
Yeah. So anyway, what I attempted to do in my book, and you hit on something earlier about.
Well,
let me go back to. I mentioned that the first case in my book is a gentleman who was about 39 years old, 40, something like that. He was a small-time dairy farmer, and he worked during the day. Anyway, he he wasn't looking for publicity or to be on TV or to be interviewed. You know, he just wanted to talk to me about what had happened. And he said he went, he came home from work and was going out to take care of his cows, and he was standing at the gate to the barnyard area, and it was around 6 o'clock. The next thing he knew, several hours had passed.
So you broke up a little bit, but you said it was 6 o'clock and he saw something, and then all of a sudden he had...
No, he didn't see anything. He was about to open the gate to go to his barnyard.
Okay.
And he said, the next thing I knew, I was still standing there several hours later, and it was dark, really dark out.
So he had missing time.
Yes. And so he said he'd been having nightmares ever since, that had happened. And he started having a recollection of what happened to him. And he was on board this ship that had gone, over Stephenville there. He said, I was lying on a table, just half conscious, but I heard in my head, not in my ears, this creature talking with this military officer. And the military officer, they were also telepathically communicating, apparently, said, how much of this will he remember? And the creature, he said, as much or as little as you want him to.
Wow.
So that was the first report that I had like that. But during the following year, I got several more of these. And they were talking about very similar circumstances where they came into contact with or were abducted by several people called creatures on this UFO. And through all of the whistleblowers that had contacted me, what I found was this was a joint exercise with human, terrestrial beings that are on Earth, and they were working in conjunction with our military. But the whole exercise was to see what the effect would be of this advanced technology in the skies repeatedly. And they selected this small town rather than go over Houston or New York City or Los Angeles or something like that. After a while,
I don't want to lose what you're saying. You dropped out one more time. Let me. Well, we're waiting for it to come back. So, because this is chilling. I mean, these are people reporting being abducted, and when they're remembering the abduction, U.S. military personnel are there with the others, as you call them.
Correct.
And you have whistleblowers telling you that this was a joint venture between the military and the others.
Yes.
See, this is what I said when I told you your book scared the hell out of me. Because I'm going to be honest with you, 10 years ago, I don't know where that would have hit on my plausibility scale, but in 2024, it's right up at the top. And that makes it absolutely terrifying. Because I'm
during the late January, a good friend of mine, Jim Mars, you probably have heard of, he wrote Crossfire, the plot to kill Kennedy, that was made into the movie by Oliver Stone. Fantastic bestseller. Anyway, Jim, after a 40-year career investigative reporting, had a lot of sources, and people who knew him were calling him constantly, giving him, about the Stephenville thing, and he would say, it's Ken's investigation, call him, and he'd refer him on to me. One day, Jim called me up and he said, I have a source who's been, spot on all these years that wants to talk to you about the Stephenville, UFO flap. He said, would you like to hear from him? I said, yeah, of course. So this gentleman called me. I have no idea, what his name was or what intelligence source or whatever his, background may have been, but Jim trusted him as a source for many, many years. So he said that the Stephenville is upsetting the powers that be, and there's going to be a secret meeting at the UN in February. And I went, well, about it. And they're going to bring in all of the people from these compartmentalized area from the great nations, that the people who are involved with UFOs and ETs and, back engineering programs and all this sort of thing to discuss it. And I'm well, thanks. I don't know what I could do with that, because if it's going to be secret.
This is the UN meeting that you that is alluded to in your book, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So Dr. Michael Sella, I think, also must have the same source, because he also mentioned it, I think, in one of his books later on. But I did find out later that the crux of the meeting was that the U.S. representative was telling the people from this same compartmentalized group from other countries that the others were upset with the pace of disclosure, and that they better start preparing our people for it, or they were going to make themselves so visible that it'd be impossible to deny their existence.
That's fascinating. That is, because I think for most people, who think about, whether you go with the extraterrestrial hypothesis or the ultra terrestrials or demons or anything.
Yes.
I don't think too many people think in terms of a group of rational actors that have an agenda and who are interacting with people on Earth. And at a certain point, they're going to want to push their agenda, whatever that is.
Well, that's not exactly. Here's the thing. Advanced, non-human, terrestrial beings have existed with us and actually before us on this earth at all times. And they're tired of hiding. They don't see why they should have to. But we're everywhere. We're in the ocean. We're at the top of mountains. We're, there's very, very little where we haven't explored, and it's really difficult for them to avoid us. And frankly, they're tired of hiding, and so they are forcing the agenda. I mean, forcing disclosure is not because of. Let's put it this way: if they were hostile, they could have wiped us out a long time ago.
Right.
But the people who don't want this disclosed, or first of all, they want to continue to control the power of the UFOs that we have. How do I put it? That we've developed over the last 50, 60 years.
So we're talking sort of the Bob Lazar, that the sort of the stuff that he's brought up. Where do you assign a good bit of credibility to what he's claimed?
Yeah, I do. Two of the whistleblowers that came to me during the investigation were scientists who had worked at S1 there on Area 51. And they did say, both of them, that they had worked with Bob Lazar there. And so, that's a confirmation, at least, that he did work there. And I know There's been some controversy about even if that was true.
Yeah, I know Stanton Freeman had a big bone to pick with him. Stanton,
is a character, but at any rate, there was, trying to think, there's a guy named Bevan, I can't remember his name. He hacked into,
This is the Welsh kid, right?
yeah, he hacked into the files and found a description of it. What the heck is it? Okay, I don't recall. Oh, Wright Patterson
Yeah.
files. And they found references to, I think, specific drawings of the same UFO that Lazar described. So, you know, I think there's other anecdotal evidence that, you know.
Well, because I know he was one of the names, because in the book you do, you know, obviously you've got a set of characters that are at least nominally fictional, and then other people are mentioned by name. I think Dolan is named. So there's it. I like the fact that you have a fictional universe. It's a work of fiction, but you connect it to the real world, and it really does make it, the whole time you're reading it, you start to sort of forget that it's, you know, and I don't want to say quote unquote fiction, because, you know, it is fiction. It's what you said, it's fiction. But it's fiction with a purpose behind it.
Maybe fiction, we'll put it that way.
Okay. And I think it's an incredible technique. I wish more people would do exactly this, because it allows people to have the conversation about these things that people have told you freely and bring it to the people. How long did it take you to write the book?
About 2 years.
Okay.
And there were times when I get up in the middle of the night, just I'll make an admission. I don't type. I'm back like this, you know. And I confided that to Jim Mars one time. You know, Jim, some of his books were really thick, you know. Anyway, I was talking to Jim, and he kind of laughed. He says, "If you ever say this in public, I'll deny it, but I don't." You know? He said, "I just do like this," you know. So I wrote it out longhand, and then you know, my wife or someone would type it up for me. But I went through many, many edits, and I actually had a person who judged composition writing, creative writing, go through it for me, and so I had a number of really good editors. I would almost say it was a collaboration, because they helped me change the things around and then add a chapter at the end and so forth. But anyway, it was very, when it was so satisfying when it was finally published. If folks don't know it, when you have a book on Amazon, they have an author page. It will tell you where your books are being sold and how many. Let me give you take a wild guess where you think the first 2 copies were sold.
Where? Well, it's obviously not the U.S., or you wouldn't be asking. I'm going to go with Japan.
No, Washington, D.C.
No.
Yes. You know,
they're not subtle.
No, not at all. And I was the subject of incredible harassment from that day forward.
What? Tell me about that. What you can say.
Yeah, there's some really interesting stuff, by the way. I was on the phone with one of my sources one night, and he was a retired military intelligence, and Jan was spooked and, you know, paranoid by nature. And he said, "Jan, I think somebody's listening to our phone call." And I said, "You know what, Jan?" No relation to Jan Harzat.
Yeah.
But anyway, I said, "You know, I think I felt that way the last time we talked as well. And my wife had passed. I lived alone, Jan was alone. So I called up my cable provider, service provider, who was Charter at the time. It was about 10 o'clock at night. I called and I asked for, a technician. And I figured, well, he's just going to laugh. And I said, I have a feeling that my phone calls are being, listened in on. And he said, oh, Mr. Cherry, when's the last time you thought that? I said, oh, about 5 minutes ago. I just got off of. He said, let me run some tests and I'll be right back. So it went longer and longer, and I thought he's just going to come back. No, sir. And he said, came back on. He said, we're sending a technician out first thing in the morning. He said, there's evidence of telnet conversation, and it says, I'll send someone out. Well, set up some firewalls, do this, that, everything, change up. And I went, Telnet, is that a bug, physical bug? And he said, no, it's a program that allows them to eavesdrop on their conversations. So the next morning, some wiseacre that had just moved here from Illinois, worked for a phone company for a long time, said, I've never heard of such a thing. This is ridiculous. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And I said, well, you're not leaving until you do so.
Yeah.
So he calls into the company, finally gives them his badge number. And he said, yeah, I'm out here at the Cherry residence. I don't know what this guy wants me to do. Suddenly his face turned white and his jaw dropped. He handed the phone to me. He said, Mr. Cherry, they want to speak to you. And I got on the phone and said, yes. And the man said, we have 3 supervisory level technicians working on this. We can't find the source of this bug on your line. He said, but there's a few things we can do, but I got to tell you, whoever did this probably has the sophistication to overcome it.
Wow.
So,
that there
after
was
that,
there was a guy out here in Georgia who, I don't remember when he was working on a case. I think it was maybe in the 90s. And if I remember the details correctly, at his house, he started to get this weird sound, this weird beeping sound that would come through on his house phone. And he said, surely it's not the government spying on me. It can't be that. And he was a little scared, but what he told me is, he said at his office, everyone had separate phone lines at their office.
right.
And what got him was whenever his phone at his office, the same beeping sound started happening there. And he said, I'll be damned. They are listening.
Well, they did come back. And what I found out is when they bug your modem, they can be into your computer, your phone, and your television set. So I was on a 2-hour interview one night, and I was alone. And just at the end of the interview, my phone rang, and it caller ID said, Keller, police department. I picked hello. And this lady dispatcher said, Mr. Cherry, would you go to the front door? And two officers are approaching their door. And I went, why? And she said, we had a 911 call. And I went, not from this house, because I've been on, a Skype call for 2 hours and there's no one else here. I said, did someone say something? And she said, no, it was a silent call. And we're obligated to go out and check whenever we get silent 911 calls in case somebody can't speak or something. And so, I went to the door and there were 2 cops pulling up, one in one car and one in the other. Fortunately, there was an older officer. This young guy was all hot. He thought I was, beating somebody up or whatever in my house. He had his hand on his billy club. That's, let me explain, officer. I've been hacked.
That's somebody swatted you. which is a big problem nowadays. That's happening all the time now.
Yeah, this was a number of years ago. But here's the thing: police departments have super caller IDs. Super caller IDs. So you can't mask your number with them. So whoever did this was actually masking their real number and putting my number on the phone. Then I would be getting a series of calls in the middle of the night, people hanging up on me.
Well, you know, it's harassment. It's not just listening in. This is somebody wants you to know that they're doing it. They want, you know, they're not hiding. It's not just the NSA just listening in and tape recording everything. They want you to know.
My neighbor across the street wrote a very popular book about 9/11. And she was paranoid that the CIA or the Mossad was going to get her because she tied Mossad to the bringing down the towers. So she called me one day. She said, Ken, she'd been a senior flight attendant with American Airlines and had retired. Anyway, she said, Ken, there's a unmarked panel truck in front of you at the corner of your front. And she's and there I can't he's doing, but he looks exactly like the operators we used to bring back from Afghanistan. And I went, okay. And so after a bit, I looked and there was nobody there. So later in the day, I go get my mail, and there's a bill from my provider, Charter. And in it, there's charges for movies that I rented online. You know, 10, 15 years, I never rented a movie. So I called him up and I said, I don't know what these charges are here for these movies, but I didn't rent anything. And the lady looked on it. She said, yeah, looking back at your account, and I don't see any movie rentals before. And I said, I think my account's been hacked. And she said, okay, I'll fix it. So you can't charge more than 99 cents for a movie, and we don't have anything cheap. So if you're going to rent a movie, that's fine. By the way, what were they? Those horrible slasher movies where they chop people up, you know? And I'm like, God, you know. So later I get in my car, my Expedition, I'm pulling out of my driveway, and my GPS starts talking to me. And it says, in 100 feet, go right. And I'm like, what the hell? And I'm adjusting my seat, and it says, it's taking me to the local emergency room at the hospital.
Are you kidding me?
No. So, yeah, and listen, there's more. The one attempt to push me off the road. So, with a black SUV that rode on up against my bumper for a mile.
I mean, how
every turn I could take, they would follow.
Because I have to ask, because I'm just thinking, what would I do? How did you cope? How do you deal with that, with this mysterious threat? These are very serious people.
Yes.
They're not kidding around. Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. I was halfway through a second book with another case and even more reveals in it, and I stopped. It's just, wasn't worth the grief.
I can understand that. I can certainly understand that. It's just amazing to think that these are presumably people who are paid by the U.S. taxpayers, and they're doing this to a U.S. citizen.
Well,
and I guess I'm naive. I guess I'm just naive, and
I'm a minor author, and you really have to be astute to pick up on some of the things that I revealed in my book. But apparently they were bold-faced enough for for people to be upset with me about it. It's amazing to me they have all those kind of resources to dedicate for as long as they did to harassing me. I mean, let's face it, who am I? I'm no real threat.
Did it, when you made the decision to abandon the second book,
Yeah.
did it stop? Did you get the impression that somehow they knew you had stopped working on that book?
Well, I think I'd given so many interviews, TV and stuff like that, that I stopped putting out new information. Maybe they just got bored. So, I may be saying more here than I have before. I don't know, but yeah, it's.
I want to go back to something you just said, where you need to be astute to pick up some of the things that you reveal in the book. I think one of the reasons why it's a frightening book is because when you start to see the context that there are, and I don't want to spoil anything, because I really do think everybody should go out and read this book. I mean, it really, if you have any interest in UFOs, you need to read this book. But what I found frightening was there would be something that would happen, and there would be some exposition, something would be revealed, a particular, plot point would come out. And normally when you're reading a book, that's just part of reading a book. These are plot points, they're things that happen. But when you start to get caught up in the thinking of, okay, well, wait, is that real? Is this particular revelation, is that real? Underground tunnels and the various things involving, people dying, and the, overarching this war between these factions. And you just start to, it almost gets like Spalding Gray once said, this is so terrifying and so significant that I feel like I should just ignore it. Which that's what we do as humans. I mean, I remember when I was in MUFON talking to one of the very seasoned investigators, and I said, when I had my UFO sighting back in 90, it was either December of 97 or January 98. I was in a car with somebody driving on an interstate in North Louisiana. And the short version of it is, we drove right by a giant black triangle, just hovering. It was about probably 1 o'clock in the morning. Giant black triangle, lit up bright as you could. I mean, just like an arc welder on steroids, not moving. There it was, plain as day. And we just kept driving. We didn't stop and get out and take a look at it. And I told him, I said, to this day, I don't know why I didn't stop the car and do that. And he said, that's what everyone does. He said, he goes, you have no idea how many people I've spoken to who, look at that. This is the most significant thing I've ever seen. And they just keep walking. Right. And is it an aspect of human psychology, or is there something else going on?
A bit of a story, but I'll go into it if you don't mind.
Sure.
Gladys and Drake are two characters in my book that are real people, and they were both CIA. And they went for lunch and sat around talking to people after speaking. So to eat lunch, and there was a older woman sitting at a table kind of by herself. And I asked, may I have a seat? She said, sure, please. She seemed delighted, to have a seat with her. Anyway, I got to know her over a period of time, and she told me when she had graduated summa cum laude with a master's degree in engineering, she was approached by a CIA recruiter, and they said, we'll pay for your PhD studies, we'll get you a good job in industry, but you'll ultimately be reporting to us. And she said she went to work for Bell Labs in a building with no windows, and they weren't even allowed to tell people where they were parking. And she said they had an organizational chart there, but her boss knew better than to ask where she had been if she didn't come in one day. But at any rate, said the first assignment she got a call from her CIA handler and said, gave her a certain time, and all we want you to do is just observe. Okay. So, and you have to drive because we don't want any paper trails or anything. So she went where she was supposed to. She was there at the assigned time. And she said there was kind of a butte out in front of her, and she was looking. And out of nowhere, silently, this black triangular craft came down silently and hovered over the top of this dude. She said, out of nowhere, these men in jumpsuits came out with a cart, and whatever it was, they transferred the contents to this black hovering triangular craft. And then when they finished, they disappeared to wherever they had come from, and the craft took off silently. And that was it. That's what she was there to observe, and she went back to her handlers.
What part of the country was this in?
I'm about to tell you. The reveal is it was Dulcie.
No.
Yes.
Of course.
So, the backstory to that is that in 1952, after the Robertson report, the CIA told all of the military, every government agency to turn over all the information, artifacts, anything they had from UFOs, UFO with it, and other compartmentalized agencies didn't want to go along with it. So they all hardened their programs. So in fact, the CIA was spying on this craft was one of ours. She said we've had an anti-grav triangular black craft since this was the mid-70s when she saw this.
You know, it's interesting you say that, because one of the things that because of your book, one of the things that sort of ever since I saw the black triangle that I saw, I've always sort of said, look, you know, none of the explanations make sense, and the ones that are logical make the least amount of sense. You know, it was a military test aircraft. Well, why would you fly a military test aircraft, 20 yards off of I-20 in Louisiana? You wouldn't do that. It wouldn't make any sense at all. Well, it was aliens. Well, does that, that's maybe, but what was the purpose there too? And one of the things that your book sort of made me think about was, well, what if it was one of ours and it was just deliberately there so that we would see it? And what if they have that sort of a motivation? I don't think it's a test aircraft. If it's military, it's not, it's too old. It's not a test aircraft. It's operational. Whatever, if it was there, it wasn't being tested. It was there on an operational mission.
And according to Gladys, not a real name, we've had these at least since the mid-70s.
Well,
you're right. They're operational.
Yeah, because that would make sense, because they were flying over Belgium during the Cold War, headed towards the Soviet Union, during the Belgian UFO wave. Because that was what those photographs show. There you go. That's what I saw. It's just mind-boggling. Do you think?
Yeah. Well, I'll give you something.
Yeah, go on.
Drake is also a real person. I knew him very, very well, closely related. He was a member of the OSS during World War II, which was the forerunner for the CIA.
Allen Dulles and all that.
And he was an aide to, good grief, now my memory's gone.
Was he an aide to somebody like Allen Dulles, or?
No. Anyway, during World War II in the Asia, in the Pacific, apparently there were a number of UFOs that were accidentally shot down during aerial battles or storms or something of that nature. And so Drake and MacArthur viewed some of these sites where there were actually a survivor or two. And so that's how Drake got involved in this very complex area. And so I knew him as an older man. By the way, MacArthur later gave a speech to a graduating West Point class and said, in the future, we'll be in conflict with men from other planets, with people from other planets. He also repeated that in the Times Magazine interview later on. So it left an impression on him, and I'm sure that he reported this to the president at the time, Truman. And this is probably one of the basis for the Truman's order to shoot him down. At any rate, I knew Drake as an older man, and one night we were sitting, and he kind of stared off into the distance, and I don't know how to put this, but he was the original smoking man from the X-Files. As an older man, he still smoked heavily, but he used a little filter.
Yeah.
And he'd sit there meticulously, put this thing in the filter, drive me nuts because he would just slow and
Well, that made the cigarette safe.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. At any rate, at one point he told me that he was part of a three-man committee who made the final black budget approvals. And one year they got a request that was so large and so much bigger than the year before that none of them would agree to sign a thing. So they had this four-star general in front of them, and they said, look, there's no oversight. We don't know where the money's going. It's a huge increase. And we're not going to, approve it until, we know. So he wouldn't tell me where, but he said they took them, the three of them, to this huge hangar. And when I went inside, his words, there were all sizes of flying saucers there.
Wow.
And the general turned to him and said, that's where the money's going.
I find...
Now,
I'm sorry.
Let me finish.
Yeah, go ahead.
This is mid-'60s. We've had a secret space program at least for the last 60 years.
So this is a guy who had firsthand knowledge. This wasn't told to him. These were things he had seen. He had interacted with.
Yes.
In the book, Drake makes it a point to say that the first time you encounter this stuff, I think it correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's Drake who talks about saying that, like, you're not prepared for it. You don't know what you're going to experience.
Right.
Did that come from the real Drake?
The average person wouldn't be able to handle all of the truth if they knew it. What do you think the reaction would be if people knew that we had this advanced technology we're sitting on for the last 60, 70 years, and that human crews have been out there, not only in the solar system, but probably all over the galaxy and so forth?
If something like that came out, I think you'd have outrage, first of all, just from the standpoint of, that firmly establishes two tiers. They're the people on the inside and then the chumps like the rest of us. And which is how we all feel. But it's such a confirmation of that you're either on the inside or you're just a schmuck out, being spoon-fed.
Well, think back to the 14th, 15th century when Spain, France, Portugal, England, the kings and queens could afford to build these enormous sailing ships, and they went all over the world, and they traded with all of the indigenous, people. And if they either conquered them or did business with them, and if they conquered them, they took what they had. And so it made these countries, these royalty, just enormously wealthy. Now, what if you control that kind of technology nowadays? Will you want to share this with the rest of the world?
No, of course not.
Yeah, that's just the power behind this. They don't give a damn about this. Ben Rich, who was the
Skunkworks.
CEO of Skunkworks,
Yeah, I read his book.
said we have the technology to take ET home, but it wouldn't be brought out to save the world. Because the people who control it don't give a damn about the average person or this world. They already enjoy the benefits of wealth and power and probably longevity that we can't even imagine.
You know, that brings up something that I wanted to ask you, which is you obviously wrote this book in what was effectively a different world than we live in today. Pre-COVID, pre-lockdown. Looking back on it now, it feels like your book is more relevant now because of the environment we live in.
Yeah, I think COVID was just another chance for governments around the world to exercise power over people. Look, this disclosure is going to come out, and still they're not doing enough to prepare people for it. So they now have all the mechanisms in place to lock down the population if they need to. Look what the Chinese done. They lock people in there. They welded their doors shut, to quell dissension.
You don't even have to look at China. Look at New Zealand. Look at Australia.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, these are Western countries.
Taking away guns, all of in Australia, New Zealand, these places, London. People have gone to prison for defending themselves in the UK.
Yeah,
and so they have unprecedented power, and I don't think we've seen more than a small percentage of it that they actually have. I think that their devices they have to control crowds and so forth that we don't, sound, things that'll make people just drop in their. Anyway, I think this was all, I won't say orchestrated, but it was certainly taken it. Let no crisis go to waste, type of thing.
Yeah, which is an old.
And so I think it's preparation where, okay, what if all you got to do is control the supply chain. People become pretty docile when they haven't eaten or haven't got gas or, for a week.
Right. Yeah, I think the average person, it's not going to be too many days before their whole psychology falls apart, right. And you're in a bad spot real quick. Well,
you'd be surprised how many times I've had religious fanatics attack me and say there's no such thing as aliens. They're all demonic and so forth. That's not true. As I said, there are non-human terrestrial beings that are well advanced beyond humanity that live and share the planet with it. One of the whistleblowers that contacted me was a scientist. He collected his paycheck from NASA, but his real job was to back engineer alien technology. And he said that there was upwards of 16 different species of extraterrestrials visiting the Earth. Years ahead of us, at least.
One of the aspects of this that I think is most, most troubling, you, in your book, there's this, not prediction, but it's one of the plot points is that, the idea of a fake alien encounter could be used to do lockdowns like COVID, only 1,000 times worse. Because, as you very correctly say, if a battleship shows up hovering over New York, it's going to scare the hell out of everybody. You can probably convince them to do a lot of things in that scenario. It's interesting, given that there is an open belief out on the internet that a fake alien invasion is something that might actually happen now. There was recently, there was some stuff happening out in California. There was a UFO sighting out in California, and I was watching people on X reacting to it. And the consensus, person after person said, well, here it is, it's the fake alien invasion. And I almost wonder if that was part of their plan, and maybe they're being forced to back off, because I actually think people are starting to wake up to that possibility. I think that if a spaceship showed up above Washington, D.C. tomorrow, I think the majority of people in the country would say, nah, bullshit, it's fake. You know? And I think, like I said before, I think your book is more relevant today than whenever it was written. And I think that's one of the reasons for it, because I actually see that sort of plot point in the book is a very real thing that is in the zeitgeist, at least on the internet right now. And I know we're sort of running out of time here, but I really just do want to say, for anyone out there who has an interest in this stuff, go read this book. Seriously. You might need to read it twice, because I'm actually now sitting here thinking about it going, you know, I'm pretty sure I missed stuff. And I feel like forewarned is forearmed. And I think this is a valuable tool to be forewarned. And you certainly went through a lot because of it. You know, it's very important. So, you know, we're definitely going to post a link down there for you to go and take a look at this book. Has anyone approached you and said, "Hey, we want to make a movie out of it"?
Yes.
Is any traction?
Yeah, let me see. Oh gosh, I remember his name now. Oh, Scott Rudin. I was a feature article in Texas Monthly Magazine, and I didn't know till later that Texas Monthly Magazine is considered the premier magazine in the country, because they go by household income, and it has the highest household income subscribers. That's one level of judgment. Figuring that out, I guess. Anyway, I got a call one night. This is after I finally had a caller ID installed. But anyway, said Paramount. Okay, and I had so many calls all the time. What's that, insurance company or something? And so I pick it up, and there's this lady on the other end. She says, "It's Ken Cherry, the state director for MUFON Investigates." She went, "Yes." And she said, "Who's your agent?" And I went, "Agent, why?"
And she said,
yeah. She said, "My boss is on a plane back from London, and he wants to speak to you, but he can't talk to you without an agent." And I went, "Oh, who's that?" She said, "Scott Rudin." And so I didn't know what to do. So I said, "Well, call me back in a couple of days, see if give me your number," I guess it was. So I called up Skip Hollingsworth, who was the executive editor of Texas Monthly, and said, "I got this call, from Paramount, Scott Rudin, producer, and I need an agent." He says, "I got a call from him too. So my agent with William Morris will represent us both." I said, "Cool." So I have an agent from William Morris. Okay.
Very nice.
So they dropped, I forget what his name was, but anyway, just a joke. And we had several conversations. And so he wanted to make a movie about it. And so jokingly, I said, "Can I play myself?" He said, "No, we're going to have a real actor, Tommy Lee Jones. This is going to be kind of a
wow.
No Country for Old Men meets Men in Black."
I'd watch it.
Apparently he had Tommy Lee under contract, and I guess they won Academy Awards with No Country for Old Men, and Men in Black did exceedingly well. So anyway, I just kind of laughed. Well, the conversation went on for about a year, off and on. Finally, I get the word that Scott Rudin has been released from Paramount. And then I find out later that allegedly he's another one of those Harvey Weinstein characters. So anyway, nothing came of it. Unfortunately, by then, my agent didn't have an opportunity to talk to anybody else. The story had gone cold after a year. So as far as Hollywood was concerned.
Well, there's always hope. This is, Prime or Netflix or somebody like that should really look at picking it up, because it would. And Tommy Lee Jones would be great. He'd be perfect for the part. I'd watch it, but I'll watch anything with Tommy Lee Jones in it.
Yeah.
But before we sign off, I wanted to make sure, is there any place out there on the internet or your organization, Epic, any place that if people want to go and read anything or listen or anything at all like that, we want to make it easy for people to find you. So if there's anything out there, now's the time to plug yourself.
Well, I've mostly retired, except doing interviews and a few TV gigs from time to time, newspapers and that sort of thing. So, no, I don't. I used to have a website, don't maintain it anymore, and I used to have a radio show, don't have that anymore. So, but I tell you what, just for your listeners, if you get my book and you have questions about it, you want to email me at epic.2010@yahoo.com. I'll be happy to take your questions.
Fantastic. I appreciate that. We'll make sure to put that in the. We're going to feature that. Ken, it's been great. It's been unsettling, but no, that's it's not that I like being unsettled, but there's a difference between feeling like you're just sort of going along, listening to the same tune as everybody else, and feeling comfortable, versus feeling a little uncomfortable, but going, I'm starting to see some of the gears in the machine a little bit more clearly. And look, that's disclosure, right? It's going to make people uncomfortable.
And I think being in touch with your own feelings once it happens is a good step, because you don't want to panic with everybody else. It's like, okay, I knew this was happening. I knew that there's other intelligent beings in the universe and, visiting us. It's not just us alone on this planet. The faster people accept that, the easier it will for them to be able to deal with that, when it comes out. Agreed.
Completely agree. Ken, thank you very much. All the best. And if you ever do decide to dive into a second book, I'm definitely going to be looking forward to it, and you'll have to come back on the show and talk about it. And
all right.
If you do find out anything really interesting, make sure you let me know. Okay.
All right, will do.
Thank you very much, and best.
Enjoyed it. Hope we have the opportunity again sometime.
Me too. All righty. Well, thank you very much, and have a good evening.